Thanks, Morgan. I definitely want to remind everyone to type any comments or questions into the chat about any information provided in the introduction. I am honored to introduce our first keynote of the workshop, Unequal Access, Libraries and Entrepreneurial Equity. First, we have Dr. Channelle D. James from the University of North Carolina at Charlotte. Sorry. No, that should be Greensboro. I'm so sorry. Dr. James is a faculty member in the Bryan School of Business and Economics and teaches and conducts research in social and sustainable entrepreneurship. She is also the president and executive director of Community Ventures, a nonprofit startup focused on creating social good in Greensboro, North Carolina, through entrepreneurship and social innovation. She publishes based on her research in sustainable and social entrepreneurship, diversity, and community support of entrepreneurship for vulnerable communities. Dr. James is also a content creator focused on podcasts and online training to support sustainability and social justice. Next, we have Dr. Debra Smith, an associate professor of Africana Studies and affiliate faculty in communication studies at the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. Her primary research and teaching interests include African Americans in communication and popular culture, minority images in the media and marketplace, and developing teaching strategies that incorporate popular culture, language, and power. Dr. Smith also studies the intersection of race, ethnicity, and health, and the role of social environment and social environmental factors such as social class, racial and spatial segregations, healthcare inequalities, cultural competency, and systemic racism, and how they contribute to health disparities as well as corporate and community roles in health outcomes and health innovation. Again, feel free to type in your comments and questions in the chat. I will be your moderator for the Q&A session after our speakers present their information. Please welcome Dr. James and Dr. Smith to present Unequal Access, Libraries, and Entrepreneurial Equity.
Hello, everyone. How are you? Just give me 1 minute as I share my screen. As you all know, this Zoom world we live in is not for the faint at heart. So please bear with me as I get started with our presentation. I'm going to, as you know, my colleague is with me. Does everybody see? What do you see? Debra, what do you see?
I see it.
You see it. Good. Right. So my colleague here, we've known each other for 20 years. We've been working together for 20 years. It's hard to believe. But we had to tag team on this one. I thought when we got the opportunity. Again, our topic is unequal access, libraries, and entrepreneurial equity. I want to give a forewarning about this. We are not actually saying that libraries in this case are where the unequal access is happening, right? So we want to clear that up. Also, as in any presentation around equity, diversity, and inclusion, we will have to say that some of what we present is from our perspective, and that we realize that there are multiple and competing ways in which to look at the concepts that we're bringing about. And we hope that you will bring those challenges and those supports to us when we go through the question and answer portion of our presentation. This is a conversation. So it's a keynote, but we're doing it differently because, you know, Debra and I are, for the most part, qualitative researchers. Part of that qualitative experience is realizing the role of the researcher in the theory as it's happening, right? And so we have a lot of dialogue that we parallel with the research that we do. The results that we have in our research are shaped by our perspective, and we want you to know that up front. We are two African-American researchers committed to equity and justice in the work that we do. So you'll see a bit of that, but there'll be some back and forth between Debra and I as we talk through this. And I like to have fun too with this. So you'll see a little fun and something to laugh at, I hope also. Is that okay, Debra?
That's fine.
So here are our objectives for today. We're going to talk about the duality of the perception of librarians and the perception actually of minority entrepreneurs. And so we're going to give some experience about that. Then we're going to talk about how we see librarians, which is in one place kind of the pragmatic piece of the librarian, but also the theorist. And we're going to talk about how that combination actually helps them connect to minority entrepreneurs. We're going to talk about a little case study of some entrepreneurs that I've been working with recently. And then we're going to end with how can librarians and libraries be co-creators with minority entrepreneurs in terms of minority economic development. So Debra, you go ahead and take, well, I'm sorry. First, I wanted to just set this all up. I'm sorry, set this all up. In my work, I work from the premise that entrepreneurs are in an ecosystem, right? They are these agents who work in the ecosystem. They are there to recognize opportunities to act. They are resource seekers and gatherers. One of the main things that they're doing is gathering resources so that they can create the ventures that they need to create or create the opportunities that they want to create. They are definitely risk takers, and entrepreneurship has these two sides of it. One part is the creativity and innovation part where the entrepreneur comes up with the new ideas, but the other part is the planning and development piece of that. And really that planning and development piece works because entrepreneurs are risk takers. They are oftentimes trying things that others have not tried before in order to create value. And it is in the planning that we reduce the risk that entrepreneurs face as they risk the resources that they're gathering in other pieces of their venture. So risk taking and librarians are so important because it's kind of one of the resources that helps to the entrepreneur to decrease the impact of the risk that they're facing. Definitely entrepreneurs are about creating value and of course, innovators. And so what we know is that one of the things that entrepreneurs need is they need communities that are supportive and receptive of what they have to offer. Entrepreneurs realize that if they don't have that connection to the systems that they work in, that they aren't going to be successful. And so really the work that we talk about is how does the minority entrepreneur fit into the community, and how does that community beneficence that entrepreneurs need, how does that actually happen? And so we believe that librarians can be a part of that for minority entrepreneurs. So now, Debra, if you will take the next one.
Okay, so as LaMonica mentioned, I work in a space where I'm looking at the image of people in media, because sometimes we draw our conclusions about other people based upon media as opposed to firsthand accounts. And so I'll talk about that in just a second, but I want to talk about the fact that by virtue of its name, we often believe that libraries, especially public libraries, are these spaces of opportunity for all individuals, and that they provide access to their information for everybody. But not all individuals consider the library to be egalitarian. So just some history here. Historically, libraries played a role in catering to privileged Americans, usually not those of color. They've colluded in racial policies and practices. For example, libraries used to be inaccessible to people of color. And then in their next iteration, they were segregated. So in essence, there was this prevalence of libraries not being the province of people of color. And especially when you think about African Americans, they couldn't use libraries unless they were returning or collecting materials for white patrons. So I know that this audience doesn't need me to tell you that the founding of the first major public library in the US was in response to immigrants who were coming into the country, particularly from Europe, which by extension means that public libraries played a role in the shaping of this racialized society. Researchers have even said that librarians never questioned or debated in print whether Americanization was an appropriate mission for the American public library. All right, and so throughout history, African Americans were beaten, arrested, often lost their jobs for attempting to even register for a library card. charged with disturbing the peace. And even when the Supreme Court in 1966 said that public facilities must be equally accessible to all, a common practice was to either totally close the library rather than provide services to Blacks, or to even remove all the furniture so people were encouraged to just check out books and leave immediately. So we have this backdrop of history in which people of color are operating with regard to libraries. And against this historical backdrop, you have entrepreneurs of color who are making the decision to access library resources. So Channelle mentioned that I was going to talk about this theory of the gaze versus the voice and duality of perception in library experience. And so the gaze versus the voice says, I gaze at you, and even before I hear your voice, I've drawn some conclusions about you, or I've made some assumptions about you, often based upon stereotypes, rarely firsthand accounts. So if, for example, and Channelle said we were going to be funny, so please take this in a funny vein. The gaze of the librarian, based upon historical stereotypes, is that they are what Rad and Rad call the 3 S's. So librarians are shelving, they're stamping, and they're shushing people. And so they've been depicted in media images as sometimes intimidating. So when it comes to minorities with this duality, based upon history, there's this feeling that they're unwelcome in the library and that they may believe that their physical appearance precedes them and that conclusions about them have already been drawn even before their voice is even heard. So to experience a dismissive librarian or to feel inept in navigating library resources may exacerbate that feeling. So subconsciously, minority patrons may feel out of place in the library because it was a place that was belatedly available to them by the inaction of laws. And to be transparent, busy or unhelpful staff sometimes can be misconstrued as being dismissive, which may even deter people from wanting to visit the library. So Channelle, I want to talk about this idea of the librarian as a pragmatist and a theorist and this library entrepreneur connection.
You know, that's great that you segued to there. I wanted to say that it's not that we believe that libraries and librarians haven't made great strides to close that gap of making patrons of color feel comfortable in the library. We're not saying that. But what we are saying is that the history haunts us. And so you'll find out later as I talk about some of the interviews that I've done, how it might haunt us. But, you know, we have to be aware that that experience is there for some. So I want to talk about what librarians are actually doing and how they can be a connection for entrepreneurs. Let me start by talking about my relationship, and he doesn't know I'm going to do this, with Steve Kramer. Just recently this semester, I had a student, and it actually was an international student. English was her second language. Her assignment from me was to go, and I didn't contact Steve Kramer ahead of time at the UNCG library, but I said, go and tell him that you're going to record, but record your session engaging with our business librarian at the university, and kind of just have the same scenario as if you were going in to ask for help on your project. And after that experience, I dubbed Steve Kramer the Cardi B of the libraries. And this is why. Without any help from me, you can see in this video this interaction between the librarian and the student, where the librarian, he got the assignment right? He understood the assignment, and he understood that he needed to do more than connect, point to resources, but he needed to really help the student see how her theories about how her venture would work interacted with the data that the library had available. So that's an extra step. I will say that I often work with local entrepreneurs in several counties around North Carolina. And sometimes I will go to a library with an entrepreneur that I'm working with. I often work with low-income entrepreneurs who are sometimes, not sure about how much the library is going to help them. We go in and we start to look at resources. I have been in the situation where we have engaged with the reference librarian and had that librarian just point to resources. And upon leaving the library, I was not sure if the entrepreneur I was working with was still going to be able to engage those materials after I was gone. And so I realized from what Steve Kramer does with my students that even entrepreneurs in the community, they need that librarian who can negotiate both the pragmatic part of being a librarian, here's where the resources are, and that theorist that's in the librarian who probably has their own dreams and the way they look at things too, their own innovation, and they're using that to help understand the innovation and the dreams that the entrepreneur has. And so that's so kind of critically important. So I want to talk about, so we're running out of time. I want to talk about some of the entrepreneurs that I've been working with. This summer, I worked with a group of entrepreneurs. They are what I call mezzanine level entrepreneurs. Mezzanine level entrepreneurs are those who are past the startup phase, but they probably are at the growth stage of their business. And so in this particular program that I did with the Chamber of Commerce, we helped them to develop a growth plan, which is on the other side of a business plan. And so as a result of that, I was able to talk to them about the resources that they need, what databases that they need. And then I found myself saying, and you can go to the library and use those. And it becomes very clear that within the training that we need to do more to help the entrepreneurs to engage and use the materials. The reason why is because of that ecosystem. Historically, we still, even in that group, we had entrepreneurs who said things like, I still don't have the same experience as the majority kinds of entrepreneurs have as a minority entrepreneur. I still struggle with procurement and how I can become a government contractor. I still struggle with data. And how do I get the right data about the market that will appeal to me? Some of the research that Debra and I look at is the experience of the entrepreneur as an African-American entrepreneur and not being accepted in terms of the quality and what they offer just because they are minority entrepreneurs and what that means to the business. And so we know that they face those barriers. And the question is, can the library help them not just point to resources, but deal with the complexity of the things that they need to grow their ventures? Here is a little bit of a feedback in talking to two of the entrepreneurs. Keith, and we removed the names to protect the innocent, but Keith said, and Keith is a marketing executive, owns his own marketing business, a couple of $1 million in assets for that business. And he said, just from a marketing perspective, he saw that libraries needed to look past training and references and look at how can they align what kind of what they have in the library with the actual needs of minority entrepreneurs. So that takes a conversation. And oftentimes you see minority entrepreneurs, they go to training in one side of town and then the training says, okay, go to the library and find this. So we see a need for those two things to come together. Keisha was another one of the entrepreneurs, very successful woman, veteran, minority entrepreneur. And she said, I find a need for libraries to have more culturally relevant resources for minority entrepreneurs. She said that in general, there there are resources for entrepreneurs, but when it comes to those issues that are specific for minorities and for women, those tend to be harder for her to get to and reference and find. And so we came up with really quickly 6 things that we think are important so that librarians can co-create with minority entrepreneurs. 1, focus on assets, aligning library assets with the actual needs of the entrepreneurs. Next, a focus on economic development. How can librarians look past that kind of pointing to the resources and co-create in terms of what economic development means for them and for their communities? Partnerships, partnering, and I know some of you are already doing this, but partnering more with anchor institutions in your communities so that the training and the resources that the library has can come together pointed to the needs of minority entrepreneurs. Again, that idea of cultural relevance is important. How can those resources of the library really point to the deficit that happen in the community around supporting entrepreneurs of minority entrepreneurs? Accessibility is I think an issue that libraries work in constantly across different formats, but for minority entrepreneurs, is the space welcoming? Is the space welcoming for them to come into and feel like they will be seen as an patron of the library and as an entrepreneur? And then the last one that we thought about is asking the question, even in an institutional space, whether libraries are willing to do business with vendors that are minority-owned businesses. Because once they do that, they become a great representation of what they're trying to help the minority entrepreneur negotiate. So that's really quick, but I want to stop because there are a couple of questions. One question that I saw is the beneficent. What does beneficence mean? In this case, we're talking about creating a supportive, almost over-supportive environment is a beneficent environment. So a lot of my work is how can communities provide strong support for entrepreneurs? So we got that question. Let's see. And Debra, if you see a question that you want to answer, I'm going to try to go back again.
So there's one. So this
Would you
person,
like me to read it out?
That would be great.
Yeah.
Okay. So I referred a small business owner to talk to SCORE to help grow her business. Oh, I missed it. She came back to me and said the SCORE person was dismissive, condescending, and not helpful, making assumptions that she was a startup. I was empathetic. What else can I do?
Yeah, so, unfortunately, I actually think that SCORE is a good program because there is, SCORE is represented by those people who are retired, people who are retired from business. On the other hand, just like a lot of organizations, a lot of the people who are there tend to be white and male. And as much as they want to have perspective, they do not necessarily understand what it is to walk in those shoes. And so I do, if somebody wants to contact me, I'm going to leave my contact information. There are some programs around the nation that kind of are looking at how to do that, how to have, and there's many successful entrepreneurs, and we see this in minority entrepreneurship, even in immigrant entrepreneurship, where there are people from those communities and they can help look at those issues across the life cycle of the business. Everybody's not a startup. And just because they're minority businesses don't mean that they're startups. And so we have resources that can help you, but that is an issue, right? And so one of the things I try to do when I work with an entrepreneur is get clarity about what they need. Always, people are experts in their own lives. That's one of the keys to EDI. You have to treat everybody like they are an expert in their own lives. They may have a problem or an issue, but they know some stuff about their lives that you don't know. And that's how you enter the conversation with respect for other people. Debra, do you want to?
Yeah, I saw a question where someone was saying, what are some ways that libraries can engage entrepreneurs, focus groups? One of the things that we learned in our studies is that minority entrepreneurs especially may use the library for different reasons rather than just checking out resources. They may want to have networking opportunities there, or they may need space for a meeting that they're having. And so just to be a welcoming environment for that kind of venture would be helpful for minority entrepreneurs.
Yeah, that's a great way. So it's a parallel, right? We come in, we have a workshop on this issue, and then the librarian is there and say, you're talking about this. This is how these assets will fit into that. We got to start having the conversation together. That's why, we were talking about collaboration with anchor institutions invested in entrepreneurial education is key to this, I think, for librarians.
Thank you so much. We have another question. How might you go about finding out the needs of entrepreneurs? Surveys, stakeholder conversations with chambers or econ developers, focus groups, question marks. What's your advice on that?
So I'm going to tell you now, one thing that I do know, if you ask minority entrepreneurs what they need, they will tell you. So because they have been bold enough already to start a business. Let me say this, people don't often understand how bold you have to be to risk everything that you have to start a business. So they aren't scared in any way to do that. But you want to, I think a qualitative approach is very important there. There is quantitative data out there about what entrepreneurs do. There's some quantitative data out there about minority entrepreneurs, but by the sense of being minority, that data is not as rich. What we do have, though, is qualitative experiences where we minorities in different programs, like my Scale to Excel program. Scale to Excel is a program that I work with at the chamber. It is under a national program that supports, called Enterprise, that supports minority entrepreneurs, all right, nationwide. And so what I've been able to do is go in and talk with entrepreneurs who go through that program and say, what is it that you really need? Lots of cities have these kinds of programs. So what I'm saying is librarians need to tag team with those programs. And any librarian in Guilford County who wants to work with minority entrepreneurs, let me know and I will get you there. But we have to have the training. Again, the training has to match up with the resources. They can't be disjointed. And that's what I see happening a lot.
And if I can interject, I want to, recommend that librarians tag team with each other. Some rural communities don't have the support, the librarians there. So tag team your, next closest metro area or something, and then they can maybe connect you to other ecosystem partners. So I think that was so great. I do want to maybe just read, I don't see any more questions.
Comments.
But yeah, some comments. Oh, actually, I do see something I'm working on as the business librarian at the University of Louisville is developing partnerships between business classes and local Black entrepreneurs where student research meets the self-defined needs and goals of the business owners. Have you taught any classes where students partner with local business owners? If so, how did this go and what was the final deliverable product?
Okay, every class I teach. That is a key. I tell my students from the beginning, you are my innovation, right? And so in the Bryan School at UNCG, it is very normal for entrepreneurs to contact us saying, I have a business or I have some research I need to do, and I'm not sure how to do it. Do you have a student group that can help? And it actually works pretty well in two ways. One, the student gets to practice the content that we're teaching in class. And then the entrepreneur gets not only access to data, because you guys know, and I know we have some database people on here, those databases are expensive. And so the fact that these small entrepreneurs, and like I said, sometimes I'm even working with entrepreneurs that are, experiencing homelessness, right? So they can't afford to connect with some of these resources, but students have it, and they can not only pull the data, but then they can help analyze the data and give the person options. And so oftentimes we have businesses leave with plans. Now, are they perfect? No, they're not perfect, but nobody's business plan, feasibility study is perfect from the beginning. You work toward perfection. And so it actually is a great combination. The institutions have to help refine the students, right? They have to teach our students, we teach our students about how to be professional, how to appropriately present the content. We teach that in the classroom. And then the entrepreneur comes. Now, the one thing on the entrepreneur side you have to be careful with, entrepreneurs are busy.
Yes.
And so sometimes they aren't as readily available because every time they're away from the business, that's money out of their pocket. So, you have to be able to set up ground rules for both the students and the entrepreneurs at the beginning, and then to facilitate that check-in and make sure everybody's on board throughout the support. But we do it a lot here. It is a natural fact. One of the theories about entrepreneurship education is that you can't teach entrepreneurship unless you're doing it. It's a hands-on sport. So we love those kinds of projects. And I know across the nation, some of you'll find institutions that have that same thing. Yeah.
I just want to give either of you maybe a minute or so to wrap up and add any final thoughts. Their contact information is in the chat if anyone wants to connect or ask questions beyond today.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead first, Debra?
Okay, so I'll just say what I talk to my students about with this idea of believing images that are created by media, whether it's the librarian or the entrepreneur. Firsthand accounts, firsthand conversations. I saw that one of the first comments in the chat was someone saying that in library curriculum, you learn to fix your face. And I would say take that further and have a firsthand account with individuals, a firsthand conversation, so that you're not relying on stereotypical images of them to make assessments about who they are, that you're not relying on that gaze, but you're also taking into account the qualitative part of that person, which is their voice.
Yeah, great. And I want to point out my colleague here is Diane Welch, who has many more years of experience in training people for entrepreneurship than I do. She talks about the Small Business Institute, and it has projects year round done with real live entrepreneurs. And Steve Kramer, I know we talk a lot about him. We're just crazy about him because he does so much for us. He is one of the librarians that has presented there. So my thing is that I am very focused on how libraries and librarians can collaborate with people like me who are teaching entrepreneurs how to do the work. And I think it is so worthwhile for more of that collaboration to happen. You are in an odd way, librarians are the keepers of the knowledge. You are gatekeepers in some ways. And so that is a heavy responsibility. And by the way, you don't get paid enough to do the work that you do. Let me just say that. So that if there are anybody who pays bills on here, let me tell you, pay them more. But that is that collaboration between the librarian and those who teach entrepreneurship is important, particularly for minority entrepreneurs. So so collaborate, co-create.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Dr. James and Dr. Smith. This was a great keynote to get us started. And thanks everyone for the discussion. We are going to turn it over to